All right, here's what we're going to do today. Greater is he that is in me than he that's in the world. That's from the scriptures, okay? What that means is this. Greater is the God that lives inside of you than the one who prowls around this world. The context means that he's talking about Satan. Greater is the God that lives inside of you, if you're a follower of Christ, than the one who prowls around this world, Satan. God is more powerful than Satan. And if he lives in you, then he's going to equip you, help you, encourage you, walk with you to accomplish the things that he wants you to accomplish. So today, we're talking about the third week in our So What series, where we look at if you sow this, you're going to reap this. If you do this, this is going to be a part of your life. And if you've been kind of listening to what Josh was hinting at, we're going to talk about generosity today. Now, if you're first Sunday with us, you're like, I'm new to the church. Like I just walked in, like first time here, and you're going to talk about money today. This is what I was afraid of. I met this guy, Keith, right after first service, and he's like, hey, I'm new, and this is my first Sunday ever being here, and I was like, I'm sorry. Like first Sunday here, and I was talking about money. I said, I don't talk about money every week, but he's like, no, that was cool. I dug it. I was like, okay. So if you're new, you might dig it today, all right? So here's my goal. I just want to talk real authentically about sowing and reaping. Here's the concept. Right up front, honest truth. Sowing generosity. Reaping blessing. That's it. You got it? We can all go to lunch. You didn't get it, though, I can tell. What does it mean to sow generosity? Like, how do you generously sow, and what are you supposed to be sowing? We haven't talked about what we're supposed to be sowing. And what does it mean to reap blessing? I tried to do this whole message in 1 week. Ain't no way it's going to happen, all right? So I'm dividing this into 2 weeks. This week, we're going to talk about what does it mean to sow generosity. And next week, there'll be even more people here because this is the thing we're really interested in, right? Reaping blessing. Because we're like, okay, what's the thing I have to do to get the blessing? Now, let me just teach this right off the bat. If you got a Bible, let's open so that we're all looking at the same scriptures so you know I'm not lying to you. I start reading scriptures to you like, oh, so that's where it's found. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6. I don't care if you're looking at your phone, got the scriptures, just don't be texting me while we're up here, okay? All right, you look at your paper Bible. If you don't have a Bible, grab one out of the chair in front of you, all right? 2 Corinthians 9, 6. I'm going to keep reading this a bunch, so just trust me, keep looking, you'll find it. It says this, whoever sows sparingly, sparingly will reap. Whoever sows generously, generously will reap. That might not read the same way in your Bible as I just read it to you, but I read it in the most accurate translation as to how the Greek was written. It literally says this, whoever sows sparingly, sparingly will reap. And whoever sows generously, generously will reap. So the concept's simple. Sow generosity, reap blessing. We've got to figure out what each of those is. We almost called this series Captain Obvious. Here's why. Sowing and reaping is just one of those obvious things. This is an agricultural statement. If you want a big garden, a big harvest, lots of grain, lots of veggies, if you want a lot, you have to plant a lot of seeds. Captain Obvious, right? I mean, if you want a lot of veggies, you better plant a lot of seeds. But the question becomes this. What is it that he's actually talking about here? And look at the next verse, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7. This gives you the context. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. That's the context. This is talking about our generosity in giving what it is that God has blessed us with. But let me put your minds to ease about two things. Number one is this. We already took the offering. I ain't passing it again. All right? This is not one of those moments where I'm going to like rile you up into some crazy moment and be like, and now let's give. Ain't none of that here. That's called manipulation. The second thing is this. I want you to understand this. Pastors, leaders have taught this. Some of them have taught this in such a way where they have revealed that they have no authenticity and no sincerity and no accuracy in their teaching. Because there are some pastors who have taught these scriptures in such a way to coerce people to believe that it's an investment strategy. Have you ever heard a pastor teach this? Hey, if you give this amount of money, What it means to be generous is that God is going to bless you with even more. You give that 1,000, he's going to bless you tenfold. Have you ever heard that? It's crap. I'm sorry, it makes me mad. When the scriptures are abused and used, this sowing and reaping is not an investment strategy. And it's particularly abusive when pastors do that with the poor and say, hey, I know you have needs and you have wants, and so if you give this, you're going to reap this. That's abuse. Here's the hard part. It appeals to our innate desire to have a financial secure future. You know what I mean by that? And I'm not even calling you greedy. I'm not calling me greedy. But don't you and I both want to think, man, if I could just know that my future is financially secure. I got these kids, and I'd love for them to go to college, and I'd hate to have to just say, hey, kids, good luck, figure it out. You know, we don't have anything financially to give you. I'd love to supply that for them. I'd love to be generous in that way. I would love it to know that when my friends were financially struggling, that I could come alongside and help them out. And that whole sowing and reaping in the abusive way that it's taught, it feeds on just that innate desire to have more. We ain't going to do that, all right? We already took the offering, and this is not a financial investment strategy. You with me? That's my disclaimer. So here's what I want to do. You guys are good Bible students, right? So if you read a verse and you're not sure what it means, here's what you have to do. You have to understand the story around the verse. So let me give you the story in a nutshell. It's a story of 3 churches. The first is this. It's the Jerusalem church. They're over there to the right. That's where the first church started. It's where Jesus was crucified on a cross, where he was resurrected from the dead and then showed up to people. It's the same place where his followers came around after he was resurrected, and the Holy Spirit came and gave power to people. Not only that, 3,000 people in one day gave their life to following Christ. That's where the first church started. This story, the context is about this Jerusalem church. Now, you got to know this about this Jerusalem church, though. If your heritage was Jewish, and your dad was Jewish, your daddy's daddy was Jewish, and your daddy's daddy's daddy was Jewish, and you could count back for thousands of years how your family were all Jewish, and all of a sudden, this Jesus shows up, who's a Jewish rabbi. He dies on a cross, claims that there's a resurrection, and all of a sudden he shows himself to other people. It's as if you are actually walking away from your heritage. Not every Jew saw it as the fulfillment of what the Jews were waiting for. So think about this. Some of these Jews who decided to be followers of Christ because they believe in the resurrection, that Jesus was the fulfillment of all these Jewish promises, if they were the only one in their family that believed that, they'd be ostracized by their family. Think about it. If you were a businessman, guess who no longer bought your stuff? Guess who no longer would barter or trade with you? You lost your entire social and financial position in the Jewish society. So it didn't take long for poverty to reach the church in Jerusalem because of persecution. Some of them, the persecution was so bad, they just had to run out of town and flee. And what's interesting is one day, the church is meeting 3 main leaders of that church, Peter, James, and John. In walks into their meeting this guy by the name of Saul. He was one of the reasons that the church was persecuted. And he no longer called himself Saul, he called himself Paul. And he walks in, he says, guys, listen, I know that you wonder whether I'm really an authentic follower of Jesus Christ because I persecuted the church. He said, but understand this, y'all are leading people to Jesus in Jerusalem. See the rest of the area? I've been planting churches out there. He would just go into a city and he would start telling people about who Jesus is, and they're like, I think you're right. I believe this. And they weren't even Jews who were believing. These were people who had weird, strange, kind of cultish religious backgrounds. And he started building these churches, not buildings, people. They started planting these small churches. Paul comes in, he says this, guys, we want to belong to the same church. We want your blessing as the Jerusalem church. Don't shoulder us, though, with all your Jewish expectations. Circumcision, eating the right foods, blah, 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 all these things. He says, to walk with Christ means you believe by faith that Jesus died for you, was resurrected, and is by faith and faith alone and not all these Jewish laws. Are you still with me? I'm throwing like a ton at you right now, and I know you're kind of like, ah. And here's what the Jerusalem church said. It is by faith and faith alone. They said, would you do this one thing, though? Would you remember the poor? When you go plant these churches all over the place, would you just remember the poor? And Paul said, I would be happy to remember the poor. So get this. When Paul starts traveling, those lines that are on there, those are all about the trips that Paul would take. He started going up to Asia Minor up there, and he crossed over to the left to Macedonia. And that's the second group of churches I want to talk about real quick. Macedonia, it wasn't a real wealthy area. It was in the north up there, and the Macedonian church, if you know, they really struggled financially. They were poor. Most of them lived in poverty, but here's the cool thing. The church that was poor in Macedonia, when Paul said, hey, you've all believed in Jesus, they said, you know the Jerusalem church? The place where your faith came from, the place where Jesus was crucified and resurrected, they totally approve of you as a church. You belong to them. You're linked. But what they asked was this: would you remember the poor? The Macedonian church was poor. But instead of the church going, remember the poor, we are the poor, they turned around and said, we would love to give to the Jerusalem church. We would love to support them financially. We don't have much, but we're going to dig deep, we're going to save, and we're going to give to that church because our brothers and sisters in Christ who gave us their faith from Jerusalem, we want to be connected to them. Not only that, but Paul says this. He says they actually begged with us, urged us, pleaded with us. Don't leave us out of the financial giving because that means that we're a second-class church and we are not second-class citizens in the kingdom of God. Don't deny us the right and the privilege to give. Whew. They were struggling, but they were unbelievably generous. Man, I've never gone into a church that begged to do an offering. Have you? Macedonian church. There's a third church in here that I want to make sure, and this is the church that Paul's writing to in this letter about sowing and reaping. Look down where it says Achaia. It's the region, and right above that word is the town Corinth. Now, that's actually not an island right there. There's a little landmass. I've stood on the bridge that links those areas over the canal. They used to bring small ships in there because they have two ports, one on the east, one on the west. You could take a small ship, put it on a cart, bring it from one port over the land to another, and you saved all kinds of time as far as trade routes. What happens in port cities that are the best port cities? They become rich because you can tax whatever goes through there. There's a ton of trade and wealth going through Corinth. The difference between Macedonia and Corinth is huge. Let me just make a real quick comparison. It's like Stockton in the north and the Bay Area in the south. If you're from Stockton, God bless you. We'll pray for you. Take an offering afterwards for you. What I'm saying, Stockton is rated as one of the worst places to live, not only in California, but I've seen polls where it's one of the worst places to live in the United States because it's such a depressed economy there. Even though it's kind of going up in California, they're going to lag behind for a long time. But in the South, though, in that Bay Area, there's wealth. So here's what I want you to get. Corinthian church, they had great economic opportunity. Okay, are you clear with me right now? And this letter that we just read about sowing and reaping was to the church in Corinth. You got the context now. Here's what I want you to do. In your Bibles, open up to chapter 8. So you got to turn back just one page, 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And if there's a 2 Corinthians, there has to be a... Yeah, it's not a trick question. 1 Corinthians, good. You're with me. Thank you. I appreciate it. There's a 1 Corinthians. And at the end of 1 Corinthians, Paul says this. Don't turn there, just listen to this. He says, hey, now about the collection for God's people. Because he told the Corinthian church, hey guys, the church in Jerusalem, just know this. They just said, remember the poor. And the Corinthian church was like, absolutely, let's give. So this is in his first letter. He says, do what I told the Galatian churches to do. On the first day of every week, each of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with his income, meaning that let your giving be proportionate to what it is that God's blessed you with. Save it up so that when I come, no collection will have to be made. Then when I arrive, I will give letters of introduction to the men you approve and send them with their gift to Jerusalem. After I go through Macedonia, I will come to you. He's saying this. We talked about this offering, and you guys generously said, yeah, let's do it. You had great, generous intentions. He's saying, hey, by the way, I'm coming back, and we're going to finish this offering that it is that you gave us. So they have generous intentions, but great economic opportunities. This is the church that he's writing to. Look in chapter 8, verse 1. Here's his letter, not 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians. This is his second letter to him. So maybe a year has passed, maybe longer. And he says this, now, my brothers, we want you to know about the grace that God's given the Macedonian churches. Out of the most severe trial, this is the Macedonian church, the most severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the saints. They did not do as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord and then to us. Do you get it? Paul's writing to the Corinthian church, the Bay Area, and he's saying, let me tell you what your brothers and sisters in Stockton did. Those who were living in way worse economic situation than you are, living in poverty, extreme trial, they were unbelievably generous. Paul uses them as an example. And don't miss this, though. And by the way, I'm going to go through this so fast, I would encourage you to just underline some things that you might want to go back and read. And I would say this, underline this. They gave themselves first to the Lord and then to us. Here's what I believe that means. Generous Christians are driven not by pastors or by a request to give. I believe that generous Christians are first committed to God and then compelled to give because they realize how generous God has been with them. Our generosity flows from a gratitude that we have to God. So he then says this, verse 6, he says, so Corinthians, we urged Titus, since he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace. The act of grace is the offering that they're coming to collect. Verse 7, but just as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in your love for us, see that you also excel in the grace of giving. It's interesting because he's not commanding it. If you look at the very next verse, verse 8, I'm not commanding you. I'm not telling you that this is the law, this is the rule. He's like inviting them. But listen to what he says next. It's going to get real uncomfortable in a minute. Listen to this. He says, but I tell you, I want you to give to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. He's telling them, let me tell you what the Macedonians did. They were unbelievably generous despite their poverty. And I just wanted to test your love to see if you love God and love God's people as much as they did. Well, that's kind of an awkward moment. It'd be like me coming to you and say, hey guys, we got this thing we're going to give to, this project, this need, these people, this organization we're going to give. And by the way, let me tell you what the church in Stockton gave. Whew. They were unbelievably generous. Now let's see what you got. That's a little in your face, isn't it? But here's what I love about Paul. I don't think Paul's being obnoxious, and I don't think he's being manipulative. You know what I think he's being? I think he's trying to inspire the people in Corinth by the generosity story of another. You know, when we do things like Beautiful Day or we have volunteer opportunities around here or a project to give to something, you know what inspires me? The stories of other people. When there's a single mom who's got, 3, 4 kids and she gives more of her time than families that got 1 kid and 2 parents. And they sacrifice money and time to give to projects when I know that there's people who have more time and more money. When I hear of, at the end of the year, this is about 5 years ago, true story, about 5, 6 years ago, we were giving towards an end of the year project, and this guy came to me, he said, listen, our budget at home is strapped. He said, but this is what we're going to do. We got together as a family, and they had teenage kids, and they said this, we budgeted what it cost us to run our heat in November and December. We're not going to turn the heat on in our house for 2 months until January 1st, and whatever it is we save there, that's what we're giving. I had to stop and think, how committed am I to what it is that I'm giving? Why? Because I'm unbelievably inspired by people's stories of generosity. And I think that's what Paul's doing. He's just saying, here's example number 1, the Macedonian church. And then he gives a second example. We haven't covered this yet. It says this. In verse 9, he goes, by the way, as an example of generosity, let's just consider, Jesus. Look at what it says. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that through his poverty you might become rich. Now think about this for a moment. Jesus, in heaven with the Father, leaves heaven to come to earth, born in a manger, in an animal trough, lives a tough life. He's not rich, owns nothing, walks in travel, is ridiculed by most, dies on a cross, is resurrected so that you and I could have a restored relationship with God. If that's not generosity, I don't know what is. Make note of this. Your generosity and my generosity will never even come close to matching God's generosity with us. And Paul just reminds him of that. He finally gets to his request. With all that in mind, all these examples of generosity, here's my advice to you. Verse 10. And here's my advice about what is best for you in this matter. Last year, you were the first not only to give, but also have the desire to do so. He's saying, hey, you had great intentions. Now, verse 11, now finish the work, so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it, according to your means. Meaning, don't give what you don't have. Give according to what it is that you have. And it goes on to say this, for if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable. Meaning this, if you're not willing to give and you give begrudgingly, he's like, man, that gift is worthless. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one doesn't have. So I started thinking about this. This church in Corinth, they started out really well with good intentions. And Paul is saying, I'm coming to you. I'm going to visit. And it goes on to say further, he says, don't let me be embarrassed and don't embarrass yourself because I'm going to send some men to you. Not only that, but there'll be some Macedonians coming along too. They know what generosity looks like. And he's saying, we're all going to show up. And when they do, I don't want to be embarrassed because I was bragging about how generous you were, church. And so when they come, don't be embarrassed. And I was thinking, what would halt or slow down the generosity of a church? I did some research on this, and I looked up what was going on in Corinth in this region during this time. Tacitus, a Roman historian, writes in the Annals, he says, during this era, there was a great famine and drought that was going on in Achaia, the region where Corinth was. What would slow down the giving in a church? Well, a down economy. Because we don't need to explain this, right? I mean, you get this. Because we're all become really good stewards with our finances, particularly when there's a down economy. Housing market crashes, Wall Street has a big hiccup, and all of a sudden we want to be really good stewards. So what do? I mean, the day of the crash, we stop and go, okay, how much am I making now? I need to be a very good steward with what I'm giving, and so therefore we adjust our giving this direction. Right? I mean, I'm not saying that's bad. I think that is being a good steward. But then the economy starts doing this. And maybe like a year later, we start evaluating, well, now that I have this and making this, maybe I should begin thinking about matching what it is that I'm blessed with and therefore giving according to that. Do you understand that we're quick to go this direction and very slow to go this direction based off of what it is God's blessed us with? Let me give you one more thing. In the letter of 1 Corinthians, do you know what Paul was telling them? He was kind of in their face saying, man, you are a messed up church. You got some things going on in your church that are just bad. Let me read to you. Here's the things that he wrote to the church about. Divisions amongst the leaders, laziness, lawsuits, sexual immorality, problems in marriages, and when they got together to take the Lord's communion, half of them were drunk. That's his letter. He's like, man, you guys got issues. You got problems. And then at the end of that letter, and he says, hey, by the way, we're going to take an offering, and a year from now, I'm going to come back. Hey, make sure you're really generous with that. You think there might have been people in the church who are like, Paul, who do you think you are telling us how to have marriages? Who do you think you are telling us how we should have church together? You know what 2 Corinthians was in the beginning of the book? Paul argues chapter after chapter for his authenticity as the leader of the church. He's like, don't tell me that I don't have a right to say those things. I birthed you guys. I was there with you. And he's arguing for his authenticity. My two things that I believe that will halt or hinder the generosity of church, number one is a down economy. The second is conflict. We get the down economy in the Bay Area, right? It's been doing well. It's been getting better. Can I just talk about not conflict in our city, but can I just stop for a minute and talk about conflict right here? I'll tell you this, these last 2 years of our church have been our toughest 2 years since I've been here. Wrestling with lawsuit. I know for some of you, that makes you very uncomfortable. And I get it. Nobody's more uncomfortable than our leadership team with it. I think there's been other conflicts that have been in our church, and I just know this, that when conflict is amongst a group of people, the generosity is hindered. Because suspicion rises. People wonder, how are we doing? Where are we going? What's happening? And some of you are sitting here today like, there's conflict in this church? I didn't know. You're right, there's no conflict. You just sit there in your happy little world. When I was reading this and saying, God, where do I go with this? What do you want to say? I think what he wanted me to do is just ask those two questions. How's the economy and how is conflict with you and other people maybe hindered or halted your generosity? With us, with God's people, with anybody around you. I'm not talking just about giving to the church today. So I know there's a question there, though. And the question is, well, what happens when someone actually doesn't have and they're financially in need? It's interesting because Paul actually answers that question. Look at verse 13. He says, our desire is not that others might be relieved while you're hard-pressed, meaning like your financial world is caving in around you and you're feeling constricted and financially claustrophobic. But the point is that there might be equality in verse 14. At the present time, your plenty, Corinthians, will supply what the people in Jerusalem need, so that in turn their plenty will supply what you need. Then there'll be equality. As is written, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered too little did not have too little. That's God's design. That when we're blessed with much, that we might share with people. A couple things about giving. Just, I want you to know this. Compassion International magazine, they came out with some stats this summer in their edition. Just a couple things. Do you know what one of the most generous the most generous nation in the world is? Do you know this? The World Giving Index measured percentage that people gave, and the country that gives away percentage-wise more than anybody else, United States. 61% of the people in the U.S. gave to charitable causes. The list kind of goes down there. My Dutch brothers and sisters, kind of way down the list, 54%. And these are all the developed countries in the world, 130 of them, not out of the 196 countries that exist in our world today, but the 130 of developed ones. People in our nation are generous. But it's interesting because the comparison is with each other, with other nations. It's not actually a comparison to God's standard. Which makes me ask a question, like, what is that standard? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Did you know this, though, too? In that study, do you know the people who give away more of their income than anyone, which financial demographic? Here's what's stated. U.S. households that earn $50,000 to $75,000 on average gave away 7.6% of their income to charities. And that financial demographic gave away more than anyone else. I think it's interesting because middle class is such a weird word. Because in the Bay Area, middle class means something different than Ohio or South Dakota, right? It means something different in Stockton. But I think it's interesting because when we make more, our tendency is to raise our standard of living rather than raise our standard of giving. Guilty as charged right here. Have you ever, okay, this is going to be a little revealing. Have you ever given financially to something or even your offering to church, and as you're writing that check, you're kind of looking at the number, and have you ever thought, wow, I could get this with that? Oh, I'm the only one? Huh? Liars. Paul, in his letter here, it's interesting because there's another question here, and it's a good question for skeptics. Like, how do I know that where I'm giving it to is actually going to go where you say it's going to go? And so Paul actually talks about his financial integrity. Listen to this. Look at verse 16. And if you're a note taker, just write integrity right in the line there. He says, I thank God who put it in the heart of Titus that he has the same concern for you. For Titus not only welcomed our appeal, but he's coming to you with much enthusiasm and on his own initiative. And we are sending him along with the brother. I don't know who that is. Barnabas, Luke, nobody knows. Who is praised by all the churches for his service to the gospel. What is more, he was chosen by the churches. Paul is saying this. Not only is Titus coming, but someone else is coming who you picked to accompany the offering. You trust him and you know him. And then he says, we want to avoid, verse 20, we want to avoid any criticism of the way that we administer this liberal gift, for we're taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of men. He's saying this. As Paul just goes, I ain't touching the money. I might be collecting the offering, but I'm not touching the money. And you tell me who you want to accompany the offering to Jerusalem, men that you trust, because I want you to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the money's going to go to where you gave. Can I just tell you how we do this as a church? You might not care at all, but there might be 5 of you that do, and I just want to state this because I never really talk about it. Every year, we do an annual audit at our church with an outside organization. We pay a lot of money to make sure that they look at our books and make sure that they are correcting, catching anything that we've overlooked, and if there's any hint of anything illegal or wrong financially, they will call us on it, and we'll correct it. Because we want somebody outside looking at this. Here's another thing. I don't touch any money. Somebody come up to me after church and be like, Pastor, I didn't get my envelope in the offering. Where do I do with that? I'm like, you don't give it to me. You can put it in a box or give it to somebody else, but I don't touch it. I actually can't sign a check here at the church. Why? I don't want anything to do with it. I have no financial power here at the church whatsoever. That's awesome. Because I don't ever want to be mistaken, because I'm the one who stands in front and says, church, let's rally together and give, and I don't even want the opportunity for anybody to even think that I might misappropriate funds. You might not know this, but Pastor Elliott, he oversees our finance office. He's not in there counting money by himself. He's not even counting money. A group of people count it, and then they tell him how much is in there, and he takes the report to a finance committee, who takes the report to approval to an elder board. It goes through so many different filters. I just want you to know that there's integrity in this. We have a thing called a benevolence fund. You know this? Some of you give to it. And then when somebody's struggling and they have a financial need, they come to us and say, could you help us? Or here's what's interesting. Some people can say, hey, this other person in our church is struggling. They don't want to come to you, but they need, and they have a need. How can we help them? You know, I can't give away more than $50. You know that? Me and myself, I can't. But if I give from 50 to 500, I have to have another pastor or elder sign off on that, because we just want people to know there's financial integrity there. I think it's 500 to 1,000. There's got to be 3 of us on the board. And anything over $1,000, the entire board has to approve of it. I know that this sounds like, well, this sermon is just weird right now. It is. But where else am I going to tell you that? I mean, Paul's just saying, there's financial integrity here. I just want you to know that our church has financial integrity in this. And by the way, we have open books if anybody has a question, or you have a better way to add more levels of security and integrity to the system, please let us know. You can look at our books, and we will add those levels of integrity. Paul says this. He says, you've excelled in the grace of being a great church. He says this, now excel in the grace of giving. Look at how he ends chapter 8. He says this, therefore show these men, the Macedonians that are coming, Titus and the other brother, proof of your love, that the reason for our pride in you, so that the churches can see it. He goes, the churches are coming, they're going to look at your offering, let them be proud of it. And then you finally get to this chapter 9, and I need to wrap this up pretty quick, so stick with me. He says, he makes this statement, verse 5, so I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to visit you in advance, to finish the arrangements for the generous gift you had promised. Then it will be ready as a generous gift, not as one grudgingly given. Paul's saying, if I got to go there and you're not ready, I'm going to be embarrassed and you're going to be embarrassed. And we don't want that. I'm just letting you know that this is coming. It was your idea. I mean, you guys were saying, yeah, we're all in. But I just know that the idea of being generous, and when the offering's ready, there's something that happens in the middle called life. Sometimes we don't follow through on how we said we wanted to give. And then he makes this statement, remember, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows generously will also reap generously. And then he makes this statement. Look at verse 7, and we're going to finish on this right here. I'm going to give you 4 things that I'm going to ask you to go do. Because if you're new, you might have seen some of this down here. These are just seed cards. And every week we're talking about sowing something. And so we've said, hey, would you take a card, write on it your action based off of what it was we preached about, and you planted these things here. I'm not asking you to make a decision in this service today and like write on, for the next 6 months I'm going to give this and plant it here and everybody's going to watch. We're not doing that, okay? So turn the pressure down, relax. But there is a card inside your bulletin today. I'm going to ask you to take it home, and I'm going to ask you to live out verse 7 at home this week. Here's what verse 7 says. Each of you should give what you decided in your heart to give. not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Here's 4 things I see there. I'm going to go over it real quick. When you go home, it says, I want you to make a decision. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give. And by the way, earlier it talked about giving according to what you have. So here's what we're going to do. This is going to sound really weird, and if you're new to church and you're like, I thought Christians were weird. Now you just confirmed it, Pastor. I want you to go home, and I want you to look at what you made this year. Go for it. And then I just want you to look at what you gave this year. It's super simple. And if you have kids, here's what I would highly encourage you to do. I haven't talked with my wife about it, but this is what we're going to do, honey. Just thought I'd let you know. We're going to look at what we made this year. And we're going to look at what we gave this year. And our kids are going to do it with us. Because how else am I going to teach them how to give? They're going to follow their mom and dad in this thing. I'm either going to raise generous kids or I'm not. And so look at what you made and look at what you gave, and you decide if the word generous or sparing should be attached to that. Because it's one of those, like, I could tell you, hey, do you think you're generous? And you could say, yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10, are you generous? Yeah, I'm a 6 or a 7. And just go for it. I mean, because it's one of those, like, you financial people get it. You're like, well, what do the numbers say? We do that with budgeting, right? Why not this week? Look at what you made and look at what you gave. And would you attach the word generous to it? Here's the second thing, though. Check your finances and check your heart. So when you check your finances, here's all I want you to do. Just ask God, God, what do you want us to give? What should we give? Not next Sunday, but this is in part 2 here. Check your heart and ask for conviction. God, what are you confirming me to give? 2% of my income? 10%? 20%? I don't know what it looks like. Some of you are like, 20%, that's crazy. It's interesting. There are people who have decided, here's the amount of money I need to live on, and anything above and beyond that, we're giving it away because they've just decided where the word enough is. That's enough. Second thing, make a decision. And it's not a decision for the week. The offering there was for a year. Does that make sense? So I'm not asking you to make a decision what you're going to give next Sunday. Here's what I want you to do. Make a decision about what you're going to give for the next season. It could be, hey, for the next 4 weeks, I'm going to give this. It could be, hey, from here to the end of the year, I'm going to give this. By the way, you're not going to bring that little seed packet back here and bring it up here. This is for you, your family, and God. Maybe it's from here to the school year, the end of the school year. Or maybe it's from this point on for the rest of the year. Here's what I'm going to give. Just make a decision. Here's why. I'm not asking for like pledge cards or anything like that. What I'm asking you, I'm actually trying to give you the gift of freedom. Because every Sunday when the offering comes around, if you're asking the question, what should I give? That's a terrible experience. I wouldn't come to church if I had to do that every week. Like, it comes by and like, what do I give today? I didn't go to the ATM. I mean, that's just a bad experience. The good experience is we decided to give this. It takes all the pressure off the offering because we've already made the decision about what we're going to give. Does that make sense? Decide for the next season what you want to give. Okay? So you're going to check your finances, check your heart. You're going to make a decision. And then the third thing is this. Don't be reluctant or compulsive. You know how bad it feels to be compulsive about that? Like, maybe I should give more. Or just be at peace. Follow the conviction that God gave you. I don't think it's a week-to-week pressure that we're supposed to deal with. I think it is actually, and it's nothing to say, you know what, if somebody comes to you and says, or you see an opportunity, I think that's the good compulsive kind of giving. That says, you know what, I saw a person in need, and I just met that need. Way to go. And you just do that above and beyond the baseline. And here's the hard thing. It would be so easy for a church to say, this is what you give, 10%. In the New Testament, it doesn't say every Christian should give 10%. The word tithe, which means tenth, is used. And Jesus talks about it, but he never says, hey, every Christian should give 10%. I think the goal in the New Testament is right here. This is the biggest and best teaching we have on how to take an offering. It's you sit with God and you make a decision. For me and my family, the baseline is 10%. That's where we start. Off the gross, not the net. I'm just telling you that not to be arrogant and prideful because so many years I didn't live like that. But probably more than the last decade, probably the last 15 years, we've decided that's who we are. I will tell you what, you guys, I have more financial freedom and peace in my life than I ever have. Because I'm not under that, what should I give now? And so just decide and then give. And here's the fourth thing, and this is the really important one. Laugh, smile, and just be cheerful about it, because that's the kind of giver that God loves. If you give out of reluctance, man, that gift, it ain't worth it, because God wants your heart, not your pocketbook. But Paul says this, I'm going to test your love. Awkward, but in the scriptures. So here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to take that card home, and I just want you to figure it out. What did I give? What did I make? What did I give? What's the thing that God wants me to give? Write that number on there, and you plant it somewhere in the house. As just a reminder. And by the way, write your season down there. For 3 months, we're going to do this. You know what's interesting? In the Old Testament, this is the only thing that God ever says in the scriptures to test him in this. Test him in giving. And see if he doesn't bless you. Next week, we're going to talk about what it means to be blessed. I know some of you are like, I'll do the card as soon as I figure out what it means to be blessed. Let me finish with this. In a message like this, it's so tempting, particularly if you're a skeptic or if you've been abused in the past by a leader who used this wrongly. It feels like the pastor is taking from you. Let me give you an image. Probably 15 years ago, I had a group of graduates from high school, and I was doing student ministries. And I told these graduates, hey, when you graduate, you're going on a senior trip with me, whether you like it or not. And we're going to go backpacking. I'm an outdoorsman. I love it. These students, none of them were outdoors people. They had options of where they could go on their senior trip. Their friends were going to Mexico, laying on a beach, being on a cruise. And I told them, no, you're actually going to go in the wilderness, and we're going to go backpacking together. We got to this where the trailhead was supposed to be, and the gate was closed because we had this freak snowstorm in June in the Sierras. We didn't actually get to the trailheads, so we just said, hey, we're going. Parked the car side of the road, walked over the gate, and started from there. It added a couple extra miles to our trip, and for non-backpackers, 18-year-old, most of them girls. Sorry, I made it sound like that was a bad thing. Just more challenging. We get to this one place, and we camped overnight. And the next day, we were going to summit this peak, and there's a beautiful lake inside there. The next day, we start climbing up this peak, backpacks and all. We got dumped on. It rained on us like you wouldn't believe. It rained so hard that I literally said, throw your sleeping bags out, throw your tarps over top of you, and just hunker down. For the next 4 hours, it just poured on us. And I know the image in their head was of what their friends were doing on the beaches of Mexico. And they hated me for that amount of time. Next morning, we woke up, drenched, cold, started a little fire, had our little oatmeal. But that morning, I knew, because I had been there before, that I was walking them to a location where they could stand in awe of God. And we got up and finished the trip. And those are the kids and myself that got to a location that was really hard to get there. And it was like I was dragging them there. It's like, Pastor, you're taken. And by the time they got there and they stood in this unbelievable bowl that just wraps around with a lake beneath it, and they just stood, and for 3 hours, they just had time alone with God. That was the first moment on the trip that they came to me and were like, you weren't taking from us. What you were trying to do is give us an experience. And we finally got it when we stood there where we can stand in awe of who God was. But the journey was kind of tough. Can I just tell you this? I think the journey towards blessing and generosity is a tough one. And it might feel this week like, man, pastor's pushing on me. Man, he's asking us to do this. And some of you won't even do it because you're just want to walk out of here mad and be like, I'm generous. Who's he to say that I'm not generous? You decide before God. It's none of my business. I'm just trying to teach you what the scripture says. But I'm actually trying to lead you to a place where you will stand in the wonder and the awe of God. Say, God, thank you for the freedom and the peace that generosity marks my practice. And I can read a scripture like that, knowing that you can laugh and smile at me, God, because I've tried to give my best. It's not an easy journey, but it's a journey of blessing that we'll talk about next week. Let's pray.